about anybody else got their hands dirty a little bit with? Yeah. You were saying earlier about you've got like a very kind of a Broadway style system in some of your auditoriums.
Our one auditorium has 24 channels of wireless in it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mapped out.
Yep. Yeah, you have to do some actual frequency coordination when you get that many channels together. Especially, you have to run them at pretty high power because you're in an auditorium and they're on people and there's scenery and it's a different kind of a thing than commercial AV, but related. The physics is the same. So, I was saying earlier to our sound person, I might have been thinking about North Korea when I made this slide last night. Sorry about that, but it has kind of a dark humor to it, especially if those are those VHF mic systems that you ended up getting mad at and throwing out. Well, these are them going in the trash then. We'll think of that. All right, so it was working. Come on, baby. All right. Let's see if it'll work later. It does. I just hit the wrong button. Okay, so this is me. I came from the industry. I'm still in the industry till they kick me out eventually here. And, but I've had a lot of experience as a manufacturer, an integrator, and an end user to a degree. And today I'm going to make this is all going to be as generic as I can, because I'm not going to talk specifically about my stuff. I may use it as an example, but I'm not trying to push my stuff here. But if you go over there, I'm trying to push my stuff. So you can expect that, all right? But I do have a background so that if you do bring up either now or back at the booth or via email or give me a phone call and you have questions or you are having you want some input on putting together your system, I'd be more than happy to help. The first thing I wanted to update you all on, are you aware that the FCC has auctioned off almost all the 600 megahertz band? Pretty much aware of it? Okay. Did you know that it was actually the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012 that authorized that? You knew that.
Well, I did contracts at Frontier. Running around and pulling frequencies.
Okay. Because part of what this was supposed to do is raise money to pay for a payroll tax cut that happened back then. So they're a little, they're not quite in gear with the, what is this? This is 2018, so that's a little behind. And it was a voluntary incentive auction. Well, no, it wasn't. Because everybody who was a DTV broadcaster on the 600 band, they had to move. It was voluntary whether they wanted to continue to broadcast, and if they did, they were going to find them room either in the VHF band, which is in the lower part of the spectrum, or in the UH band with all the other DTV channels. So kind of an interesting group of names for something that really isn't what it said it was. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. But the people who bought it, they're doing mobile broadband and fixed broadband. And the FCC seems to feel that that is a better use for our spectrum than wireless microphones and even broadcasters. So that's why this happened. They hope to raise about $80 billion, and I'll show you a couple slides later what they actually raised. And then if they have the money, when 9/11 happened, and of course this is very serious, the different first responders, when they were trying to talk to each other on that site, they didn't have the same frequencies. So they couldn't coordinate their efforts very well, and that might have actually contributed to some of the loss of life. So the other thing that they wanted to do was to try to take some money from this and build a nationwide Emergency Response Network, which was authorized way back about 2001. So that still hasn't been implemented because they authorized it, but they didn't fund it. So I was in DC Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It is a different place. Okay, so what are they going to do with all those broadcasters that are in the 600 band? They have to move them. And by the way, out of the number of people who said that they were going to leave broadcasting, you could count it on one hand. So basically 1,100 broadcasters from the 600 band are now going to move somewhere else. So they have a 3-year plan to move them over. And so for instance, there's 10 phases here, and these are just examples. So what ends up is their end dates for some of these are in 2020, and there's a representative of showing the broadcasters coming from up here, which is now a no-no, and making it down into this area and that area. Only 13 went into the VHF, which there's actually quite a bit of free space down there. And one of the reasons that people didn't go down there is because it's more complex to make your equipment work when it gets to be the longer wavelengths. In fact, from a wireless microphone standpoint, if this was going to be a VHF type of equipment, the antenna would be incorporated with the cable on the microphone, because the wavelength would say that the antenna should be about this long. And so that does add a little bit to the complexity, but we've done it before, because there were wireless mics in the lower parts of the VHF, not all that long ago. So it can be done, but the broadcasters also had extra work to do that, so they didn't. And so most everybody ended up right in here. So what does that mean? Well, I've got 2 examples here. One is New York City metro area, the other one is Atlanta. And they go from, this is kind of the current column is right, come on. I'm losing my laser button. Okay, so this is the current. So what that means is today, these white spaces, which people actually refer to as white spaces, are the open channels, okay, for this market area, for the designated market area of New York City. After that repack, that 3-year process, moving all those people down from the 600, that will end up with going from 30 open channels to 18 open channels. Plus, they're not going to leave well enough alone the ones that are already on a channel. So I could be on channel 5 for a long time, and I've been there for 20 years. The FCC, when it does its repack, it may decide to move me to channel 6, because you can see on the after column, which is over here, they're bunched together. And the reason for that is not completely clear, but it does give them a chance that if they wanted to sell off additional spectrum, it'd be easier for them to do that. Otherwise, it's just they're neat nicks and they want to have all the used ones together and have the open ones together. But Atlanta's the same way. They go from 36 to 22, and this is pretty typical. So what that means is 2 bad things that could happen. So I'm a wireless user, and I'm using this channel. I've been using this, it says channel 25 there. I've been using that for a few years. I've got wireless microphones on it. It's not in the 600 band, so I feel good about that. But sometime in the next 3 years, there's going to be a DTV channel that's going to go land right on you. And it doesn't seem like it's even related to this action, but it is. So what we're ending up with is just things are getting more and more compressed. And so what the answer really is technology. And the reason the answer isn't going to the FCC is because the industry has tried that, but the Verizons of the world, the AT&Ts of the world, the T-Mobiles of the world, they have many, many dollars, right? And they really want the spectrum, and the FCC thinks that that's actually a better use for the spectrum. And so we're going to be outgunned with that. So we have one thing left, and that's technology. So what's happening with all the manufacturers, and I'm a manufacturer, what we're trying to do is try to fit more channels in less bandwidth, and we're also trying to make our systems so that they're tunable over a wider amount of frequencies. That way, the little bit that's left out there, you can get more channels out of it, and you'll be able to still add systems. Because people still want wireless mics. They do. Everyone from the little kids that are, doing their first DJ gig to, AV type systems to other performance systems. So it isn't like they're going away. In fact, there's an estimate, I think it's coming up here. Yeah, more than 1 million devices are going to need to be replaced because of this action. Now, speaking as a manufacturer, I'm not looking at this as a big opportunity to sell. I mean, yes, I am going to have to sell or resell some equipment that's 600 today, and hopefully I'll be able to get that resell. And everyone's offering rebates and stuff to try to make it go better. But the hassle factor for our customers, getting them this mad and that type of thing, it really isn't worth it. We would have preferred it didn't happen. It's not going to be like a big windfall for us like some of the past actions of the FCC. Okay, so just summary of this whole thing. We've talked about this, and you can read. T-Mobile actually was the one that spent the most, and all they got was $19 billion. $9 billion of that was T-Mobile's. T-Mobile in November started turning up services. So those white spaces in between the 600 band are now available for them to use because they purchased it whichever markets they purchased it in. And if you are in there, if your pastor is having a Sunday morning service and one of the T-Mobile trucks go by because they've said that they're going to be patrolling, there's a fine of up to $10,000 per day per frequency. And the reason that they're doing that is because if you're selling this new broadband wireless service, the downlink is a hefty, solid signal that will knock out the pastor's mic, but it won't be interfered with. The uplink from the individual mobile devices, they're thin, small type signals, and those you can knock out multiple ones with a normal wireless microphone. So that's why they're very serious about it. They're under a lot of pressure that they've spent that $9 billion from their stockholders, that they have to get that revenue going. So they already have been at it for 2 months. And it's mostly in the rural areas, partly because that's where the demand for broadband is, and partly because there's fewer digital TV stations there that they have to work around. Because if you remember, if you look at this here, in the 600 band, there today are TV stations here. If you're in a small market, there's fewer TV stations. So if I'm T-Mobile and I bought part of this and I want to use it, if I go in the rural areas, there's going to be more open channels there so I can kind of get started. I can have a nice chunk of bandwidth that I can use to sell my mobile and fixed high-speed data. So that's probably more than you wanted to know about the 600 auction, but now you can tell your family at dinner. You can bore them about the Act of 2012 about, the Job Creation Act that took away my microphone. Dang it. So, all right. So now we'll talk a little bit about some best practices. And it really matters is what kind of organization this is, because this is something that has to do with how your organization does stuff. I've noticed that when I look at microphones and I look at I get to hear about the service issues too, because globally I've got all the pre and the post-sale tech support. There are some organizations that are really hard on goosenecks. I mean, I don't know if they take them and they swing them around or what the deal is, but normally you keep this little trim ring tight on this and it's gonna last for years, right? So there's certain organizations that I tell them to put Loctite. Some of you will know what that is. It's used in automotive and other things. You put it on the threads and it keeps it tight. It won't loosen up from just vibration of using it and stuff. And the reason I bring that up is that organizations are different, and what might seem like a normal way to use a microphone for one organization may be not how they want to do it in a different organization. So let's talk some more. And these are just examples. This is not an exhaustive thing, except that it's exhausting to listen to me. But it's not an exhaustive type of thing. All right, so lots of different things that are important to your project, right? So we'll just kind of talk about some of these. Every project's going to be different, and it's going to be based on at least 3 or 4 of these factors are going to be something of each project, but certainly not all of them. So here's a quiz question, which is, what did you talk about at your last business meeting that shouldn't have been kept private? Maybe it's going to snow tomorrow? Wow, those are nice shoes. Although maybe someday, it might be something that could be considered not so good. But really, you're talking about your finances, you're talking about your client's finances, you're talking about HR issues, you're talking about health issues, your strategy. At one point, Microsoft, and they still have this conferencing center in Redmond, it has 100 conference rooms, all in the same center. And they had all analog microphones, and analog microphones are very difficult to encrypt. There was an Electro-Voice system a few years back that tried to do it. But digital's easy because it's sending representatives of ones and zeros, so you can scramble those up and then unscramble them on the other side. So that's easy to have privacy with that. But back to Microsoft, they have these 100 rooms, analog mics. Anybody with a Radio Shack, because they had Radio Shacks back then, a Radio Shack scanner could go into the parking lot and listen to Bill Gates at that time talk about his strategy for the next 2 years for Microsoft. And so eventually the AV people, and there was a company called CompuServe was one of the companies that was involved, they kept telling their security people, which were data security people, listen, you don't want to do this anymore. You want to have an encrypted system. So first they bought an AKG system, and then they bought a Sure system that they liked better. But now you can rest assured, if you own stock in Microsoft, there actually are encrypted, those meetings. But it's something that's important and easy to do with digital. And so you're going to see when you talk about privacy, there's going to be advanced encryption 128 and advanced encryption 256. Those are the two most common. Either of them are probably going to be fine unless you're anticipating spies wanting to find out what's going on in your organization. I suppose if you were in some sort of clearinghouse that was talking in some sort of credit card numbers or something that could also be hacked, then you might be, under more scrutiny. It's nice to have a standards-based encryption, like FIPS 197 stands for Federal Information Processing Standard number 7, and that's an NSA encryption. And those that have been laboratory verified, that's like another step above that. So, for instance, there are microphone systems out there, mine is one of them, that is on a GSA schedule that says that we are actually compliant with FIPS 197. And so that means that from a commercial standpoint, you pretty much have got what you need. You know, there are some other encryptions that are in the military that we wouldn't be able to get a hold of normally. So this is a, you know, these are good encryptions, and they will keep your intellectual capital safe. But it's really just like computer security, and people haven't thought about it, but now they are. Okay, so microphones. The reason that they're wireless is usually because you want to keep the room flexible. So if the tables move, you want to be able to move these. Or you've got this solid, I don't know, prehistoric walrus tusk inlaid table in the boardroom, and they don't want to drill any holes in it to put microphones in, so they want to have wireless ones. So that's another reason. For instance, there's a slide here that will show the Supreme Court of Canada. And the reason that we got that job is because they didn't really have anywhere to put conduit that wouldn't interfere with the historicness of the building. So they decided that going with wireless was going to be easier. So the other thing is that you've seen a lot of video carts. A lot of these lecterns are self-sufficient. They'll even have a loudspeaker in the front of it. It's nice to have a small system that can roll with that. Cute. Another thing that was on the list, and this thing never gets the kind of respect it should. I mean, okay, so who works in an organization that has conference rooms? Okay, so who has the budget for acoustic treatment of those conference rooms? Who has the budget? Who pays for that? You've got the budget? So at the beginning of the year, your boss lets you put in some, 10 grand for acoustic treatment of your conference rooms. You're doing much better than most. What it usually ends up being, especially after that's already in use and installed, is it's like the end users, the business people using the meetings, it's not in their budget to do acoustic treatment for the conference rooms. We just go in there and use them, and the facilities people, they're about maintaining stuff, right? They're not really going to do an incremental cost for acoustics. But go ahead.
What's impacting a lot of my projects recently, I work for RIT, and although they've always taken laws as very important, what I used to get away with, I can't get away with anymore. Before I even drill a hole into a wall, our FMS people will go in and do a little sampling of what's in that room.
Oh.
I have 3 projects right now that are completely halted because to do any modification in those conference rooms or classrooms or labs would require a full asbestos abatement.
Oh boy.
And that doesn't come cheap.
No.
So it's one thing to think you would love to do some simple modifications, things that seem very logical and simple and easy to do. Yeah, not so much.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And knowing who will actually pay for this. The key to this, and you guys probably, you folks probably all know this. I said guys, and it's supposed to be dual gender, but some people don't take it that way, and so I take that back. I say people. People is good. People is very good. All right, so good electronics is never going to overcome bad acoustics. We have a $3,000 beamforming microarray microphone. It's the best array microphone there is. It's much better than those other guys' stuff because it's adaptive, and its beams travel and listen for voice and then zoom in on that voice, and then they do this wonderful auto level control of your voice. But if it's in this room, it's going to sound less than ideal, all right? And I made this room up. I Googled aquarium, and I Googled people sitting at a table. This is a Getty image here, and I thought, perfect. Because believe it or not, there are rooms. Have you ever sat in a room like this?
I have that.
You have trouble across from this person understanding what this person says across the table talking. It's a strain. When you're done with that meeting, it's like you want to go take a nap. It's already worn you out. New York Times, all their offices, they put them like this, so they are all ended up with that. Sometimes the new parts of the New York Times, sometimes at least there's some sort of carpet, but you know how in offices carpet tends to be really thin stuff, so that doesn't do a lot. So the idea is that one thing that you can do about this, you can inform your decision as far as the style of microphone. And there's basically 4 general styles of microphones. One of them is the cute little guy that we actually sell the most of. It's a boundary mic. So I'll pass this around because some folks haven't seen that before. What the boundary mic does is it takes a boundary, so that a tabletop, a floor, depending on what it's sitting on, and it takes a microphone element and it points the microphone element right at that boundary. And there's a zone, a pressure zone, that's why some of these are called pressure zone microphones, that's just off the surface of that boundary where all the waveforms come close to being aligned. So they're in the same phase, which means then they become additive. And so it picks up a real broad amount of what the sound in the room is. And so if you have wonderful acoustics, if you have a nice spot, they work really well. In fact, you can have 2, 3, 4 people share them, especially with video conferencing where you're just sending your voice to the far end and you're not trying to do voice lift in the room because they have crummy gain before feedback. The reason they have bad gain before feedback is the reason that they're bad in a bad acoustic. It's because they hear so much of the room that if the loudspeakers are repeating what you're saying into them, it's easy for them also to hear those loudspeakers. And so having boundary mics in a poor acoustics situation is a bad idea because you'll hear a lot of the room. A better choice for, come on, go out of there. This is a gooseneck mic. Some people call them podium mics. And the gooseneck mic is different because it gets the microphone off of that boundary, so it's not getting in that pressure zone and bringing in all sorts of sound from around the room. Instead, it's putting it up on this little pedestal and basically going to put it closer to the talker's mouth. And the closer that you can get the microphone to the talker's mouth, the more of what you get from speech, straight speech, which is what you want, and less of what's that room sound. And since that fishbowl aquarium had a terrible room sound, you want to get the least amount of that as possible. Now, if you were in this room and you were using headsets and headsets that had a powered loudspeaker in them, one side was a headphone, you'd actually be able to hear each other better doing that than just in the room because you'd have such a nice close mic to talker, and then you'd be able to hear it without the room sound. So the idea is get the microphone as close to the person's mouth as possible, use less room and more of the speech, which is what hopefully that's what you're wanting. I think I just went the wrong way. Yes, I did. Okay, so we just talked about this. Sharing with the goosenecks has a lot to do with politics. Some people do not want to share their microphone. especially in certain political situations. When I demonstrated for the Department of Justice, the facilities manager, she told me that they had to have the most impressive microphone for the highest ranking person at the big, they have 100, 200 people meetings where they have microphones that go around. And whoever is the chair of that meeting has to have, for instance, on this type of thing, they would have to have the tallest mic on there. And so that means that from an ego standpoint, that person probably doesn't want to share their mic. But it's easy to do. You could put this, if this was one of those two people tables, I could put this on, you know, kind of towards the far end of that table, and we could have 2 or 3 people here, and you'd be able to hear all 3 of you, because you'd be out equidistant. So they can be shared, but psychologically you sometimes can't get them to share.
Distance learning
Mm-hmm.
or a conference room
Yep.
where you're also bringing in people via the internet.
Yep.
Say you had 10 to 20 people in there. How would you like that?
Well, okay, so for we always call the sound in the room that you're in, that we're in this case, going towards the other end, we call it for far end audio. And because you don't fold that back into near end loudspeakers, you can turn that up quite loud and you can send that to the far end and they will hear you very clearly, even if there's several people sharing. Now, from there back to you is a little bit more difficult because sometimes you're actually conferencing with people that are outside your organization, or maybe they're in a home office, small office, and that would mean that they may not have the same type of access to equipment. People in the room, then if you had a good acoustic, you could use the boundary mics. If you have a poorer acoustic, you could use the goosenecks, but the goosenecks are always going to sound the best. This even sounds better than the handhelds that I sell. And it's just something about having this, you know, a nice, about this far from your face and talking into it has a very, very nice sound to it and a lot of clarity because this is a condenser head on here, and it's much, much closer than any of the surfaces that are going to bounce off and come back. So my direct sound to indirect sound ratio is very, very high. And good. That's a good thing. Did that sort of answer? Okay. All right, so we said this. Okay, the other thing with your acoustics can be the HVAC system. I was just in a place out in Washington, D.C. I spent 13 hours there on Saturday, and they had, their HVAC system was way too loud. Otherwise, they had a really nice sounding room. The other thing that we see actual meetings taking place on stages with little trade shows off to the side. That's kind of ironic because people will use loft areas, they'll use hallways, and those things you get a lot of interference, outside audio coming in here from the people down on the floor. And then you've really got to look for that distance to microphone again. But we've talked about this here. Some of it actually is rudeness. And that's an organizational thing too. Some organizations, rudeness is accepted. In other words, the people have side conversations, so it's hard for the far end to take and discriminate between the side conversations and the people that are actually talking to the far end. And user training might help with that, or it might not. It kind of depends on the rank of the person having the side conversations. Another trend here, and I am jumping around a little bit, and this is especially nice for huddle spaces, is that these two and a lot of mics out there, they have USB power. And so you could decide that you don't want to deal with the rechargeable batteries that are inside here. So you could decide just to take a cable and just plug it into one of these ports. And if they're in the tabletops, which a lot of times they are, you can just go on Amazon and just get just the right length cords so that you don't have, you know, things getting tangled on top of the table. Set them out, use them. You don't even, oh, so I'm sorry. Sorry about that. That was a sneeze starting to come up. Don't even use the batteries, or what I always recommend, leave the batteries in, especially if they're rechargeable, because in our system and in most systems like this, they will keep the battery charged. So then if something happens to that cable, or if this little power supply has a failure, now in the case of our system, you'd have 8 hours, 8 hours for this system, and that system, you'd have 14 hours with those, because it has room for more batteries. So these are the two that normally it's things that are set on the table that actually get used with that power, but it's a second way to charge our system, and it's very popular. All right, so body packs. I'm going to hand something around because I think you've seen belt pack or body packs before, but what you might not have seen, this is kind of a cool microphone. This is made by DPA, so it's very expensive. They make good stuff, but they also charge you for it. It's called a necklace mic, and it has a magnetic clasp that kind of comes together like that. And some people's clothing, it's very difficult to find a place to put a lav. So right now I'm using a head worn, which is easier because most people have ears. But with clothing, it's sometimes, especially sometimes you have an off the shoulder, just a shoulder kind of based get up. Yeah. Try not to get in trouble here. But it's much easier to put this around, and it comes in 2 different lengths and 3 different colors. And so I think it's actually pretty cool because when it's put on right, it just kind of aims up under your chin. The other thing about lavalier type microphones here, and I'll just pass this around, is that I would recommend you use omnidirectional with your lavalier mic. Now, maybe not with your mini Broadway system because you're going for gain before feedback. But most people don't know how to put a lav on, and if they use a cardioid one, that's a directional one, they can get it on wrong, and what'll happen is it just doesn't work very well. Whereas an Omni, if you're not like just driving a sound reinforcement system hard, where you'll have feedback with an Omni, otherwise an Omni's nice because they put it anywhere pretty much in this area, and it's going to work. So just a little tip I've noticed over the years. So I actually sell a lot more Omni lavs than I sell cardioid or directional type lavs. Yes. Oh, you know, once you get to a certain level, for instance, with a lavalier, you get over like $150, $200. They're all good. And then now that necklace mic, that's probably like $600. So anything that you get then, of course, over like $400 or $500, they're all pretty darn good. The difference is going to be personal preference, or maybe when it goes on my particular ear, the little part sticks out in a place that is good for my mouth, or it isn't. If maybe I've got a huge mouth and it ends up getting too much air blasts. You know, I'm getting silly again here. But yeah, what we find though, and this, you know, I'm the person that's bucking the rule, is that these head-worns, they tend to be kind of personal. It's like, now I've got this on my face, you want to put it on your face when it's time to come up and present? Maybe. You know, it kind of depends on how well we know each other in the organization. And if I know if I had the flu a week and a half ago too, so you want to do that now? I don't want to give that to you either. So, yeah. So that's why lavaliers are good, or other things that maybe don't conform so much to your actual face. But they're very handy because you are totally hands-free, right? Okay, and the classic the ones that came bombing down out of the sky. I didn't even bring one of these with. When you're thinking about handhelds, there's some user training things. So one of the things is that this mic and Sennheiser and several brands and different models, they have a little thing that sticks out at the bottom, and that is actually a shield that covers the microphone's antenna. And so if I grab it by that shield, what that does is it puts the antenna, it grounds it, and it surrounds it. And so if I hold the mic down here, the amount of transmit power that I'm sending out to get back to my receiver and get to the audio system and to get sound through the system, it's really reduced. So one of the things when you're doing the training for the user is you want them to hold it in the middle. The other thing that we've seen a lot of, because it's become kind of in from an urban type music, is to hold the top of the microphone. And that gets a certain sound that is good for certain types of music. It drives the sound person crazy because it's hard for them to get gain before feedback. And now the industry has actually made some microphones that are kind of for that, to be gripped at the head. But you don't want to do that for an AV thing because it's really not going to, all it's going to do is sound funny. Although, if there's a performance going on within the company, maybe that would be okay. So user training, there's multiple things, but one of the things is to try to hold the handheld properly. Okay, so there's other things besides what we've talked about. You could look at what the total cost of the ownership of the system was. You could look at ease of use. You could try to see how flexible it is because we have to use it in different places. Some people actually do what we call fly packs. So fly packs are like a road case, and you put the system in that, and you send it places. So if you're a manufacturer and you have, let's say, 4 different manufacturing plants, and the executives every quarter go to talk to them to either say, work harder, or they say, rah, rah, you did a great job. When they go out there, they bring their own little PA system with them, and it may have the wireless in it. And so that's what a fly pack is. A university may decide to do things out in the garden, as the Brits say, and so you have portable systems that roll out, sometimes on carts, and that type of thing. So these are some of the things that you can look at. Reliability, one thing is to look at another industry. If you want to have a reliable system, one industry that fortunately for me, because I travel absolutely full time, the commercial aircraft industry is very, very reliable. So what you can do is you can, for your system, you can copy some things from them. You can have some backup stuff. You can have some redundancy, some duality to what you put together. Our system has some of this stuff built into it, but you can have spare transmitters. You can try to go through and decide if there's a point of failure that doesn't need to be there. An extra cable that you could eliminate that would cause trouble. And then who knows the best reason to put antennas up on the ceiling? And it's kind of a trick question, except I've got the answer right here up on the slide. The reason I say it's a trick question is because the reason that you put the mic's antennas for the receiver up here somewhere is because you can't stand up here. You know, most people cannot walk on the ceiling, although there's probably a catwalk somewhere in here. But the idea is that you're trying to keep it evenly close, evenly far away from all the, if you are all holding a microphone and the receiver's antenna was up here in the middle of the room, you'd be pretty much equidistant from that. And what's nice about that is that then the power, so that signal from each of those microphones that your receiver sees is going to be about the same. So the rule of thumb is to try to keep it between one distance and two distances. And when I teach more technical classes, they all say, well, how far is one distance? Well, one distance, this would be the closest person to the antenna. So if that's the receiver, that would be the closest person, and the farthest person would be twice as far away as the closest person. And this is a zone here where the amount of power that the receiver sees is going to be even enough. Otherwise, you start getting to be farther than this, you reduce the power levels incredibly quickly because this uses something called the inverse square law. So if you double the distance, instead of just having half the power that the receiver sees, it sees a quarter of the power. And so if it went 4 times the distance, we're talking about a very, very small signal from the farthest away transmitter if it was that far away. So it's important to keep in mind, and you can do this automatically just by having extension antennas and having them up there. There's other reasons too. It's nice because they peer down on the people using the mics, and so if there's something that could block them going sideways, because a lot of people will take and they'll put their receiver in a little credenza on the side of the room, and so its little antennas are down here, and now if it's passing through people to get to the people who are farther away, and our bodies don't reflect RF, we absorb it. So we're a saltwater kind of a bag or inflatable toy or whatever. And what happens is that the salt water dissipates into heat, the RF that goes through it. And so that's why it's better to have it up in the ceiling. I kind of harp on this because I've seen so many systems where the worst time they'll fail. And the worst time is, I used to have a picture, is you'll have this big conference table, and suddenly for this meeting, it's standing room only. So you have like 50 people packed into a room that's normally has like 15 people around a table. Now they've got that credenza with the 2 little microphone antennas, receiver antennas down there. All those people's bodies, they're going to have dropouts, and they're going to call the integrator. And the integrator is going to roll a truck, and the tech's going to get there. The meeting's going to be over, and the room will be empty. And the tech will try out the mic, and they'll be going, test 1, 2, test 1, 2. It'll work perfect, you know. And it may take a while of communication before they actually, either I'm twice as long as I have been, or else I'm doing pretty good, or else to actually have that tech realize, put 2 and 2 together, that there's a cause and effect going on here. Okay, so the other thing about redundancy is it's nice to have 2 things because one thing can fail, but also, let's say that I'm in a training situation. If I have a big smart board or a whiteboard and I pull it up into the room to kind of show what the heck's going on, and I'm wearing a belt pack here, that could easily block a single antenna. And some systems now have single antennas. If it gets blocked, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to have a dropout. What it means is if you had nice high headroom above dropping out, let's say down here is dropping out, and this is like normal with direct line of sight, suddenly now you're more like in this area. So then if something else happens, like maybe a little interference from outside the room or something, somebody takes this and they put it behind their metal-skinned laptop, so then that further reduces it, then you might be skipping right along on the dropout area. So the idea is that if you have 2 antennas and they're far enough apart, you're going to have a situation where if one gets blocked, you still have full line of sight to this, and that's where the highest power transfer is for all the RF frequencies used in wireless mics. The other thing that's cool about this is that each microphone, pretending this is a microphone, they have their own path to each of the receivers' antennas. And what that does is that within a room, these little wavelengths, sometimes they cancel each other, and sometimes they add up. So it's whether they're in phase, whether they're the same polarity as each other. If they're all positive at that one particular place in that room, that'll be a real strong spot for reception. Same thing as if they're all kind of negative at the same place, that becomes a dead spot. So you get this map of strong spots and dead spots throughout a room. And if you have one antenna, then that's the map. You've got it. It's there. But if you have two antennas on your receiver, then that means that you make this map and then a second map on top. And statistically, you won't have the dead spots and the hot spots normally where they line up perfectly. So you get more even coverage, which is another thing that people don't understand. I would really, really encourage people to use some of the new standard interfaces. Don't do stuff that's too proprietary. At least plan ahead for things like Dante. USB ports are being used a lot for audio now, especially for video conferencing. There are standards out there, and some of them are things like AA batteries. More and more systems now are using AA batteries because even if you get rechargeables, they're not very expensive. Plus, if I have rechargeables and they're AA's, someone forgot to charge them, it was you. Yeah, see, he forgot to charge them. Sorry, that didn't work too well. But you can get some alkalins and throw them in there and use them until the charger's done. So it's things like this that help you get more of a system that's going to last longer. And with networks, you can be across the world. We do this a lot with our tech support. Come into a system and we can see all the parameters. We can see, do bit error rate testing because that goes with digital. Because when you have issues with a digital system, you get bit errors, just like you do with some non-wireless systems. All right, so look into the new technology. This is an example of Dante, and basically what this is with Dante, I've got two network switches, and this is what I have in my demonstration at my booth. We have two different network switches, and then each of them have a primary and a secondary port, and this is our wireless receiver here that's attached as well. And so if one side fails, the other side continues to send that media traffic. And you can't hear it. In fact, for my demo, I pull out one of the cables, and you cannot hear it go away because it's simultaneously sending it at the same time. So it's pretty cool stuff. So all of those people down there, they would love to do demos for you. They would love to borrow you equipment. They would love to come out to your site and do demos. So that's a good way, because then you can end up, that can be part of your research, you know, along with doing things like you can find out who else in your state, other universities that are using particular, get some references, and then you can get permission from your manufacturer and your dealer to do a proof of concept. So set up a certain classroom, a certain conference room, and use certain components. It can be the lighting and the other stuff besides things like the audio. And then that can be, once it's been fine-tuned, now you've got this template, especially if you're the type of organization that uses a lot of that particular kind of room. It really long-term saves you tons of time and effort. And us manufacturers love this because if we get that in there, you know, it's like getting into the Church of Latter-day Saints. If you get into one of their church-type templates, you're going to sell a lot because every month they have a certain number of churches that they build across the world. So it's a great opportunity for us. We should have to be really nice so that we can help you figure out what's going on. These are just some actual plans. My company, we have free designs. And so they consist of going in, laying the system over the floor plan, having a complete bill of materials, and we'll do an RF study so you'll know what frequencies are available. And if it's in doubt, all of our folks have got a signal hound. This is a software-defined radio which can scan from 1 hertz to 4 gigahertz. And so what this does is if we have to, we'll go on site and actually scan in the room that you want to use the system in, and that's the gold standard, because it's what's in that room that counts. And then you'll know exactly how many channels and which channels they should be to use. So this is a 4-channel system. They want it to be in 5 different rooms, so we set it up. They can actually use 4 channels in 5 different rooms. This is a large system for a bank. This is a 4-way divisible room that has 52 channels, and then there's 8 channels here and 8 channels there. And they have 600 megahertz stuff in here. So right now we're in the middle of going through replacing some of that gear because it's now illegal to be using it. But this is a larger than normal type of job. You're probably going to run into something like this. This is a 3-way divisible space, and it looks like a Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and a Baby Bear boardroom tables. But actually, these are flex tables. So they can go ahead and they can open the doors. They can rearrange this into any kind of configuration that they want. These wires are the coax cables for the antennas, and they come in, and they're going to be in the ceiling. And then the actual antennas are also on the ceiling. It actually works out very simple. This is also a UK project. They have a divisible auditorium, so they can use 2 half auditoriums or a whole auditorium. And then they have a gallery space outside, so they wanted that all to be able to use for wireless mics. Here's that Supreme Court of Canada. And mostly it was because they had a historical building and they didn't want to interfere with trying to add more wires. So this was less wires. This is Duval County Courthouse. This is in Jacksonville, Florida. They have 300 channels in that building. They're all the same RF band, and that RF band has 32 channels. So how the heck do they do this? Well, they are using very low power in there, which was 1 milliwatt in this case. And we have things that look kind of like this white circle above the door. There are powered antennas, and they have 15 dB a gain. So if you have the powered antenna with 15 dB a gain, and then you have this low power transmitter here, it almost acts like a closed system. Most of that signal stays in that room, and that's really all the place that you really want it. You don't want it to go outside the room. And so what they've done is most of the mics are wired within the courtroom. It's just the people that have to get up and address the jury if you're one of the advocates. So they average about 6 per courtroom. So they use channel 7 here. Then they'll use channel 7 maybe over here. I keep forgetting I have a laser pointer. And then down there somewhere they'll use channel 7 again. So their IT director loves it, you know.
Work with the emergency response people that are supposed to use this?
It's a different frequency.
System.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah. No, the only thing where it would interact with that would be that there would be, for their power amplifiers for their speakers, they would have to have a switch that would engage so that it would override any other talk that's on that system to have their message. You've probably experienced that with any systems that you put in. Most of them have to have a automatic switchover. We're in a lot of stuff in DC. This is the Department of Justice. It's the old group of people there. This was right after the Paris attacks, so that's why we have the expressions. These are actually my goosenecks, but we have a 6-inch version, and that's what they have. We have a 12-inch version, and then this is the 18-inch, this is really good for like a lectern, because then you have lots of room for things like laptops and stuff. So get lots of expensive advice. Fortunately, most of the expense is the people who can give you the advice. So in other words, I've been through a lot of expensive experience. I've worn out all the days of my life for you, child. But No, but the idea is that we, as a group here, we have a lot of experience. It wasn't cheap, but it's free to you. It's part of what we do. We like to talk about this stuff. You've noticed I've gone over, and I'm still talking, but we're almost done here. So get some advice. We have formalized our process in that all you have to do is you can actually send me an email, and we get up this pre-sale package with a quote and the bill of materials and all the assignments, and then we have something called free remote commissioning. And what that means is that if your team is going to go out next Thursday and put in the system, let us know. We put it on a tech support calendar, and a tech support person is ready to be first on the phone, but then these systems are controlled by computers normally, and that's how you set it up. So we will also come in onto the laptop of the technician with their permission, and we will help them set up all the parameters, and we'll do the testing that needs to be tested. And so the idea is that you'll probably raise the bar as far as the optimization of that install. That's also free, because we want you to start out on the right foot. And hopefully it does this sort of good stuff. This is kind of a marketing slide. Following up with the users, you'll know when, but you should do it multiple times. It should be scheduled. It should be something that they expect you, and if you don't show up, they're concerned, because you don't really know how it's going to go till they actually are using your system. And if they have these little irritating things happen and they don't get resolved, what happens, it's like with the old, I think this is not a cowboy saying, I think this is maybe from Europe, but when they talk about a burr in the saddle, so the burr is underneath, is between the horse and the saddle, and at first I'm sure it doesn't hurt the horse very much. But if it doesn't get taken away, you get this big sore, and it becomes a bigger problem. So the idea is you want to find these little things that are bothering them and nip them in the bud. And that way, they end up having that good attitude that they probably had when you first put it in. So I just cannot recommend this more highly. And us as manufacturers, we want to hear about any concerns as soon as possible, because chances are there's something we can do quick. You know, that there was, oh, you got that, oh, you weren't supposed to get, we'll get you this one. This will work better. Or, oh, you need a firmware update. We identified that bug just this week. We'll take care of it for you. You know, because there's usually something good you can take care of. All right, we're at the end.